of those days where you just want to crawl inside yourself and close your eyes real hard, and then when you open them, be transported to back when you were 10 again. I'm having one of those days. I'm about to open up this new and exciting chapter of my life, and it scares me. So I want to retreat back into a fantasy. I want it to be Saturday. I want my parents to not be divorced. And I want to sit in front of my TV and play Majora's Mask all day. And you know what?
So let's do that. Let's travel back in time and let's talk about some fucking Nintendo 64 games. Maybe ones that'll like remind you a little about like Death and Destruction. Yeah, come on.
The N64 is famous for a lot of things.
It was arguably the first console capable of full 3D. It challenged the limitations of human biology with its three-handed controller, and it popularized four-player couch co-op to the point that the console is
Basically synonymous with it.
But one thing that the N64 is definitely not famous for or synonymous with is horror games.
Because, you know, it has one, two if you count Doom.
Which you should, because it is noticeably darker and spookier than its predecessors. But the N64 still has a number of games with darker themes, whether it's gothic-inspired visuals, a dystopian setting, or games that downright take place in a classic horror setting. It actually has a lot of those games that we would now call horror for kids, and a lot of them are awesome and you should play them. And while the N64's library overall is pretty small compared to its contemporaries, there are still hundreds of games to sift through if you want to find the ones with the really good spooks. But I have of course done the research for you, and I'm gonna take you on a journey through each and every one of them.
Because this is your complete guide to dark and disturbing games on the Nintendo 64.
Initially released on DOS in 1995 and 2 years later on the N64 in 1997, Hexen is the sequel to Heretic, one of the first games that the Doom wave gave birth to, and it's the second of the Serpent Rider trilogy, a game that will conclude with the annoyingly named Hexen 2. In the first game, we killed the first Serpent Rider, so it of course makes sense that in the second one, we killed the second Serpent Rider, and that is what the plot is. Changes from the previous game include the ability to pick between 3 characters that have different stats and available weapons, essentially functioning like different RPG classes, which is pretty cool to see in a shooter. And the second and final big change is that Hexen takes place in a Metroidvania-esque hub world. All of the levels connect to a central hub and can be entered and exited at the player's leisure, and at several points, switches and levers will need to be pulled up and down in several levels to open up doors back in the hub world.
Play it if you think a Doom clone set in a dark fantasy world sounds pretty cool, which it does, so you should.
Doom rocked the world, and the games industry took notice. A group of developers that was quick to take notice was 3D Realms, who dusted off their old action platformer IP, Duke Nukem, and took the franchise into glorious first-person kind of 3D, with the phenomenal game Duke Nukem 3D, released in late January 1996. Taking place after the two platformer games sometime in the early 20th century, Duke is making his way back to Earth so that he can take a vacation, but while attempting to land, his ship comes under fire, and he learns that Earth is now a dystopian hellhole, but also under attack by an alien force, who are stealing all the babes so they can impregnate them and make more evil aliens. Smooching babes was Duke's #1 priority on his vacation, so he's not too happy with them being kidnapped. So he decides to do something about the whole alien invasion thing, and he travels all over the world, and he saves as many babes as he can, and he kicks as many pig cops in the ass as he can.
Play it if you love Duke. Hail to the king, baby.
In 1996, with Doom 2 on store shelves and the development of a follow-up handed off to the best Doom mappers in the industry, ID was freed up to pursue other projects, and they went about making a technological successor to Doom, a little game called Quake. Quake is bigger and badder than Doom in every way except maybe in color scheme. The levels are bigger, they're in full 3D, and they feature true verticality, unlike Doom, which at best emulated it. The enemies are also full 3D this time, and so are the guns. Like I mentioned just a minute ago, the color scheme leaves a little something to be desired though. This doesn't look pretty, but here's the thing. Quake is brown for technical reasons, as brown was the color scheme that allowed for the greatest number of colors on screen to be showed simultaneously, due to a complicated technical reason that can most simply be described like this. Wallpapers were a big thing on personal computers, and developers of hardware and OS software tried their best to enable computers to properly show off high-resolution images. This meant focusing on making earth tones as close to life as possible, as those tones are easier for humans to tell apart, and therefore, computers were able to display way more earth tones than any of the other color tones. And at least that's how the whole Quake is brown thing has been explained to me. Quake would eventually make its way to most consoles, including the N64 in 1998, and the plot is about you, the protagonist, being sent in along with your team to eliminate the enemy called Quake, before they can take possession of a teleportation device that Earth has just developed apparently. In what would become a staple of the shooter genre, shit goes tits up fast and you're in would-be classic fashion, the only survivor of the assault on Quake's fortress, and it's up to you all by your lonesome to battle Quake's death squads and collect the 4 treasures of the elements and to use them to stop Quake's invasion of Earth. Quake 2 would receive a port on the system a year later, and this time you play as another guy fighting another enemy. Some people say that Quake 2 is the true beginning of the series, as it introduces what would become the series' most famous antagonists, the Strogg, who would come back in the final single-player installment of the franchise, Quake 4.
Play it if you like fast-paced shooters and a good challenge.
What do you get when you combine Jurassic Park and Doom? Well, on the 4th of March 1997, and every subsequent year until the final installment released in 2000, we got the answer in the form of Turok. It's a first-person shooter that sees the player take up the mantle of Turok, a chosen one that's sworn with protecting the portal between our world and the pocket dimension of the Lost Land. And you do this by hunting down keys and levels, opening up new levels and gunning down everyone in your way, whether they be aliens or rabid dinos. Something cool about the series, with the exception of Rage Wars, the multiplayer-focused spin-off, is that the games are all connected and each of them leads into the other, but you play as a different Turok every time. In the first one, you are Tal Set, and you stop an evil entity known as the Campaigner from assembling a scepter that can be used to harness the power of the Lost Lands. The events of that game awaken the Primogen, the actual creator of the Lost Lands, who has been imprisoned within them, and the new Turok, Joshua, sets out to stop him with some help of some alien friends. And the climactic end of that game causes a cataclysmic event to almost destroy the neighboring realm of Oblivion, and its inhabitants are not very happy with that, and they set out to punch a hole between their world and the world of the living so that they can suck the life force from our world and repair their own world, and they are initially successful, murdering the previous Turok Joshua in the process, forcing either his sister or his brother to take up the mantle and stop them in the final game. It's a great trilogy of games, and it's a bit of a shame that they haven't been remade for modern audiences. I would love a Doom 2016 updated take on this series of games.
Play it if you like awesome retro shooters with just enough story to keep you engaged.
Often confused for a port or a remake of the first Doom, Doom 64, released on the 4th of April 1997, is actually a full-on sequel to the original trilogy of Doom games. After the events of Final Doom, which is the sequel to Doom 2, it's decided that the UAC stations, the bases where the portals to hell were all created and all that, were simply too dangerous to keep around. But since they couldn't be destroyed because, they were linked to hell and all that, they were instead poisoned with extreme levels of radiation, and for a very long time, that was it. No demons got through. Until one day, when something does get through, and it starts resurrecting demons, which of course prompts Doomguy to jump back into action, and he kills the demons and enter Hell to see what is up. Turns out that this was Hell's plan all along, as they have personal beef with Doomguy for doing, Doomguy things. So after he slaughters all of the demons in the area, including the mother demon who was behind the plan to lure him here, he then decides to stay in Hell to keep the demons down, as he figures that this will be the only way that he can keep humanity safe. Which is a pretty cool ending, because this ties directly into the Doom 2016 reboot, which incidentally also saw the game's aesthetic fully embrace the gothic look, something that this game in particular is definitely toying with more than the previous games in the series.
Play it if you want more Doom.
Released on the 30th of September 1997, Nightmare Creatures opens in the 1800s as a book is sent to the home of Ignatius Blackwood. The book is a diary and an account of what really caused the Great Fire of London. A cult known as the Brotherhood of Hecate were trying to create an elixir to grant people superhuman powers, but it instead turned them into horrific monsters. The cult, determined to make the best of the situation, created an army of these disgusting mutants and tried to take over London. But one of their own members got cold feet and started what would become the Great Fire of London, which stopped the army of monsters and also conveniently took care of any evidence of their existence. The timing is not random, as reports and sightings of monsters eerily similar to the accounts in the diary are popping up all over London. When Ignatius sends the diary to his friend, who is an immunologist, and the friend then promptly gets murdered and the book gets stolen, Ignatius then travels to London with the murdered doctor's daughter Nadia to investigate the reports of the monster sightings. This is such a good setup for a gothic noir tale, and I do generally enjoy those late 90s, early 2000s Victoria era monster movies. But Nightmare Creatures really doesn't scratch that same itch for me. It's meant to be a survival horror game, but it has very actiony gamey combat with straight up combos like a fighting game. And it has an adrenaline meter that starts ticking down whenever you're not fighting. And if it reaches 0, you then start losing health, which seems antithetical to the survival horror formula.
Play it if you scrolled past it for the last decade or two when you were looking for a 5th generation game and then just decided not to play it. Because at some point you're gonna have to see it for yourself that it's kind of a shit show.
In 1996, Capcom released Resident Evil, and it was pretty alright. So on the 21st of January 1998, they released Resident Evil 2, which is an amazing game, and I'm not the only one who thinks this, as it was an absolute smash hit. So much of a smash hit that Capcom decided that it was worth it to spend $1 million in 1990s video game money to create a very ambitious port for the N64, which compressed the game's assets from 700 MB down to 32 MB so that it could fit on a cartridge. The sound and the compression on some of the visuals are noticeably a little different, but not in a way that I would call bad. Maybe a little worse than the PS1 version, but definitely not bad. Out of all of the popular PS1 games to get N64 ports, Resident Evil 2 makes the most complete transfer, and it even has a few extra things like files scattered across the map that expands the lore of the series and some extra costumes for the cast. I know literally everyone that clicks on this video knows what Resident Evil 2 is and how it plays and what the story is, but for good measure. It takes place shortly after the events of the first game, but starring a new set of characters. One of them is Leon S. Kennedy, a cop that is starting his first day today, and Claire Redfield, the sister of Chris Redfield, one of the protagonists from the first game, as she takes time off from her college studies to come to Raccoon City to look for her brother, who has gone missing while out searching for the people that went missing in the Raccoon Forest in the first game. Their luck could not be worse, as the zombie infection that we saw ravage the forest in the first game makes its way to the big city. And before Leon can start his job and Claire can ask anyone about Chris, the city is turned into a post-apocalyptic wasteland where more flesh-hungry cannibals roam the streets than walking, talking human beings. With nothing better to do, they decide to try and make their way out of Raccoon City, which is easier said than done, and they navigate the famous police station from the series, as well as some cool other secondary locations. And in traditional survival horror fashion, they find objects, keys and other items, and battle the undead using what limited arsenal they have available.
It's an absolute classic, and you should play it if you like good horror games.
Not every first-person shooter in the 90s copied Doom. Some of them copied Descent, an amazing first-person 6 degrees of freedom shooter. And Forsaken is one of them, released on the PC on the 24th of April 1998 and a week later on the N64 that same year. There is not much to explain here. Earth became uninhabitable after a science experiment gone wrong scorched the entirety of the surface. Most of the survivors were evacuated into colonies in space, and the only people that really remained on the planet are scavengers and raiders combing the underground for treasures left behind in the rush, including a very special one. In most versions you play as one of the scavengers looking for the legendary lost treasure, but in the N64 version you are a homicidal maniac that's just here to kill raiders and scavengers for the fun of it. 6 Degrees of Freedom takes a little bit of your time getting used to, but once you adjust your brain to understand that there is no up and there is no down, it is a blast to play.
Play it if you want a shooter that's just a little different.
I'm not a big arcade guy, and I'm not a big hack and slash guy either, but I am a big co-op guy, and I absolutely freaking love Gauntlet. And the series has been a staple on pretty much every Nintendo console up until the current day. And the N64 is no exception, as it in October 1998 got Gauntlet Legends. It didn't make the most graceful or pretty entry into the third dimension, just like a lot of other franchises, but just like its predecessors, it is a 4-player hack and slash dungeon crawler where you play as either the mighty warrior, the amazing wizard, the sneaky archer, or the awesome Valkyrie. The story is simple, like it always is. There's an evil guy who wants to take over the land, or maybe already has, and it's up to you and your potential party to kill his lieutenants guarding the 4 treasures of the elements and combine them into a legendary weapon that will weaken the big bad, because then you will then have a chance to kick his ass.
Play it if you're a fan of hack and slash games, especially retro ones.
Originally supposed to be a launch title for the system, but pushed back to the 30th of September 1998 because the original publisher, Nintendo, had a bit of an issue with all the violence and gore. Buddy Harvest is an action game with a lot of environmental destruction, made by the developer DMA before they changed their name to Rockstar and got famous for making a certain other series. The plot is that an alien race has visited Earth every 25 years for the purposes of harvesting humans, and over the course of the last couple hundred years, this has brought humanity to the brink of extinction, with the remnants now living on a space station in orbit of the planet, thinking that they will be safe here since it's technically not on Earth. The aliens are not picky though, and the game opens up as the aliens arrive on the station and begin harvesting like it's just another visit to Earth. You play as Adam Drake, and you are not about to let the aliens harvest you, so you fight them off and run to the time machine that Earth has been secretly making, and you board it and you travel back in time to stop the invasion before it even happens. And that is what each level is, showing up in various points in the past and murdering the aliens before they can harvest the local population there. What makes Buddy Harvest stand out is that its levels are huge for the time and a little open-ended, and you can travel them using various vehicles you find around, and there are side objectives like finding a plane so you can fly to another island, putting out fires with fire trucks, or maybe just mowing down more aliens. The objective of each level is to repel the alien invasion, take out their ship and then kill their boss. And you do this across the world and across times in destinations such as Greece, America, Indonesia, Russia, you name it.
Play it if you're a fan of the N64 aesthetic and don't want to play a game that requires that much higher brain function.
Do you remember Shadowgate, that first-person impressive but primitive 3D-esque adventure game on the NES? Well, it had not one, but 2 sequels, and one of them was Shadowgate 64, released on the 31st of May 1999. Unlike its predecessors, and other games like them which were very menu-heavy, Shadowgate 64 has a very simplified interface system that relies on just a couple of button prompts. That, and the fact that this is a full 3D game that you can walk around in and look around in at your leisure, unlike the remake of the first game, which utilizes only still images and came out 13 years after this one, is impressive. And the full 3D navigation combined with the simpler interaction makes this probably my favorite Shadowgate of at least the 3 I've played. And the story isn't half bad either. The simple version is that after the events of the first game, the kingdom, despite the protagonist's best efforts, falls back into ruin and chaos, and becomes a haven for bandits and raiders. And centuries later, the protagonist of Shadowgate 64, Del, is traveling across the kingdom with a caravan to escape the turmoil of what is happening. But the caravan is raided and Del is captured and taken to the Shadowgate. Here, he uncovers the plot to resurrect the big bad guy from the first game, and he sets out to collect the 4 treasures of the elements and stop the resurrection ritual.
Play it if you like those gothic adventure games.
So Neon Genesis Evangelion, or EVA as it would colloquially be known, was starting to become a big thing in the West by the early 2000s. But by the time that Bandai Namco had started to make a game about it, it hadn't quite reached the popularity that would warrant a localization on the N64. So, on the 25th of June 1999, Neon Genesis Evangelion, or Neon Genesis Evangelion 64 as it is known in the fandom, released on the N64 exclusively in Japan. And it's a largely faithful adaptation of the anime in form of a hybrid gallery shooter and mecha fighting game, in all its awkwardly misinterpreted and heavily debunked Western psychology glory. At its most simple, Eva is about a world in conflict. It's 2015. Evil robots known as angels have eradicated about 75% of humanity, and you play as one of the 3 characters from the anime, who grew up during this great conflict. And you're recruited to the Eva program, and each level is you fighting off the angels that have come to Earth. And you do this from your so-and-so comfort of your giant mecha. First, you enter an arena and start shooting buildings until an angel reveals itself, and then you go up against it. And in a remember that game Busted Roof? The gameplay is like that, and after you complete that sequence, a scene from the anime will play. I'm not a particularly big fan of Eva. I think its themes, like I mentioned earlier, are heavy-handed, and that its dick riding of heavily discredited early 20th century German psychoanalyst Freud and Jung is problematic. But I will admit that to teenagers and people that grew up in more conservative and conformist cultures than mine, this is a poignant nihilistic criticism of la society. And while I think it's bad, I think that watching it when you are at a certain point in your human journey can open you up to examining things and make you re-evaluate your life and the beliefs that you held up until that point. And I think that's impressive for a piece of media to make you do that. And I have seen that happen to people, and I will give the franchise that at least.
Play it if you're a fan of Eva already.
Horror games come in many shapes and sizes and genres, but there is one to me that is horribly underutilized, and that is tactical games. Ever since I played the amazing PlayStation tactical turn-based RPG Koudelka, I have been on the lookout for tactics RPGs that scratch that same itch. Something about that style of play just naturally creates a sense of tension, and it's a bit of a shame that horror games haven't really embraced that genre of gameplay systems. Ogre Battle 64, released on the 14th of July 1999, isn't a horror game at all, but it is a game that takes place during a bloody revolution with some heavy themes, and more importantly for the point I'm making, it's a tactics game. In Ogre Battle, you play as some dude who joins the rebellion, and then the rebellion starts to take over the land and fight the overwhelming odds of their oppressors. It is definitely a game that has a vibe that is darker than something you would usually see on the N64, and the way the combat works definitely adds to that oppressive and tense atmosphere.
Play it if you also loved Koudelka and you've been looking for something to scratch that same itch, because it's almost that.
When people compare the 5th generation libraries, and particularly those of the N64 and the PS1, one game that is often pointed to as being a game that N64 owners missed out on is Metal Gear Solid. But that's bullshit, because Konami made an MGS game for the N64, and it's called Hybrid Heaven. It released a couple of years after MGS on the 5th of August 1999, and it's amazing. In the game, you are a synthetic human created by a race of evil aliens that are trying to overthrow the United States government by replacing key personnel with synths such as you. So the game opens up and you are accompanying a synth replacement of a government official, but while waiting to do the body swap, something comes over you when you notice a random woman in a crowd, and you then end up shooting the synth that you are here to actually replace with a real human, and you sabotage the entire operation. As you're taking to the evil alien hideout, you beat up your armed escort and find yourself loose in the big evil alien compound. And with the help of a rogue cell of good guy aliens, you make it your mission to wipe out the evil guys and get back to that woman in the crowd because, I don't know, she was hot, I guess. And if that isn't some Metal Gear shit, then I don't know what is. Inside the compound, you navigate the game world like you would in any other action-adventure stealth game, and you solve puzzles, shoot enemies, etc. But where Hybrid Heaven gets a little weird is when you come face to face with one of the other aliens. Because then the game turns into something that isn't exactly a turn-based fighting game, but has the basic feeling of one. and here you pick what attacks to do and what body parts to do them with, and you execute them and pummel your enemies unless they go limp on the floor and fall down. And the unique mechanic of Hybrid Heaven is its RPG mechanic of leveling up specific body parts as opposed to just leveling up your stats.
Play it if you want to see the N64 pushed to its absolute fucking limits.
Duke is back in Duke Nukem 0 Hour, which released 3 years after Duke Nukem 3D in 1999 on August the 31st. Partially based on the Duke Nukem PS1 game Time to Kill, Duke is, like in that game, called back into action by the government when the aliens start messing with the timeline. That and the change to a third-person perspective is about where the similarities end though. In 0 Hour, the aliens are out to kill Duke's ancestors so that he won't be able to stop them in the future because, you know, he won't be around. And when the game begins, Duke does fail to stop the aliens from going back, and he finds himself in a parallel dimension where New York has been turned into a radioactive wasteland, leaving most of the population dead, and the sort of survivors as zombie-like flesh-hungry cannibals. Duke finds himself linking up with the Resistance, and with their help and their time machine, he chases after the aliens across time and space, going to such exciting locations as the Wild West, Victorian England, and different New Yorks.
Play it if you like Duke and appreciate stupid time travel, because it's got both of those things.
In 1888, Jack the Ripper is disappointed that all of the murders that he had committed up until now have not unlocked the mythical power within him like he thought they would. A being then appears to him and tells him that the power he seeks, it does exist, but that he must seek it out in the dead side and build it up there. Jack then promptly commits suicide to gain access to this realm, and he then sets up a cursed asylum in the dead side and starts to train a roster of killers. Then, in the present day, on August 31st, Michael Leroy is chosen as the new Shadow Man, a protector of the world of the living. Michael learns of Jack's cursed asylum in Deadside, and that Jack is being used as a pawn to bring about the apocalypse. And Michael then enters Deadside and finds a weapon that will allow him to trigger an eclipse that will let him use his Shadow Man powers in the real world. And he then starts hunting Jack's disciples to reap their souls and hopefully stop the apocalypse. Shadow Man is one of those games that's just a few details away from being an excellent Zelda-like, but it was good enough to warrant a sequel that would come out exclusively on the PS2 a few years after this game.
Play it if you want to play a horror game that is steeped in a voodoo aesthetic, but done in a more tasteful way than what we've usually been seeing.
Like so many other franchises of this era, especially on the N64, Rayman made the transition into 3D with the phenomenal Rayman 2 on the 29th of October 1999, landing on this platform before anywhere else, at least for a week until the PC version hit store shelves in early November. While it is a game primarily aimed at children, it is dark as shit. The story is that a genocidal gang of robot pirates travels the galaxy in their flying ships, and they exterminate planets and enslave their population for some nefarious purpose. And as Rayman 2 opens up, it is sometime since they attacked the home of our hero, the world known as the Glade of Dreams, and enslaved him and all of his friends, and then began extracting the planet of its life essence, which will eventually kill it, like they've killed over 100 planets before it. In the opening, Rayman escapes, and while he's depowered because of something the pirates did to him, he nonetheless begins to fight them and search for a way to power up, and also begins to search for his allies to help him take down the invaders. It is a great game that is a mix of platformer and rudimentary action game, and has some fun gameplay diversion such as a Subway Surfer-esque endless runner minigame that occasionally breaks up the pace. It is not horror, but something about being chased by a giant demon that destroys the level itself to get to you. It leaves an impression on you when you are 9. I know it did to me.
Play it if you like Super Mario 64, but you would like to know what an alternate version of that game would look like if you switched out Bowser for Joseph Stalin.
Like a lot of other franchises around this time, Castlevania was about to make its big great leap into third person, but unlike Square's Final Fantasy, Konami didn't go with the PlayStation, a console that had much more storage space and better lent itself to this kind of grand adventure that Konami wanted to make. And Castlevania is the unfortunate offspring of their misguided belief in their own ability to make a compelling game on the N64 with all of its limitations. But, here's the thing. That misguided belief turned out to eventually be true, because while Castlevania 64 sucks fucking ass, the remake that came out just 8 months later certainly doesn't. Castlevania Legacy of Darkness absolutely rocks, and while many thinks it's a sequel, and also that it's just as bad, it is not on both accounts. It has a total of 4 stories to play through. The first one is a prequel to the story of 64, and once you're done traveling through the graphically impressive grounds of the castle and jumping up its towers and solving its puzzles and killing its Dracula, you then unlock Henry Mode, in which you play as a knight that is out to save a bunch of children who are lost in the castle, and after completing that you unlock the final mode of the game, where you play as either Carrie or Reinhardt, and you play through a truncated and streamlined and redesigned version of their story from the 64 game, and a much less buggy one, making it for an excellent experience compared to the original. Play it if you want to play through an epic gothic adventure told in many parts with many different adventures, and want to see what the N64's arguable third survival horror game looks like, because it has, I want to say, enough elements of that to maybe qualify. After the phenomenal FPS game GoldenEye 007, Rare wasn't completely done with that series, but they no longer had the rights to it, so in 2000, on the 22nd of May, they released Perfect Dark, a game that builds upon their already great first games and expands and improves upon it in every way. In this cyberpunk thriller, you play as Joanna Dark, an agent of the Carrington Institute, and you guide her through various missions where she steals information from Corporation Datadyne and finds herself in the middle of a shadow war of aliens and shadowy government organizations. Play it if you want to see what the original developer of GoldenEye 64 could do if they had more time to polish the game and also creative freedom to do whatever they wanted with the story and the gameplay direction. When the phenomenal cyberpunk Batman show ended, Batman Beyond, it went out with a fucking bang with the direct-to-video movie Return of the Joker, which saw the clown prince of crime finally make his appearance in that universe, and what a way to go out. And like so many other media properties of the era that primarily catered to children, the movie of course got a video game tie-in, and on the 31st of October 2000, this game was shotted onto store shelves and would be for the next 5 years rot in the bargain bin where it deserved to be. It is a beat 'em up, of course, because that makes sense for the property, but it is clearly very rushed, and there isn't any one aspect of this game that really works. The gameplay is incredibly repetitive and super unfair. The AI is barely non-existent, and nothing feels like it was play-tested or balanced, which makes it an incredibly frustrating experience to play through, and it doesn't help that none of Batman's cool gadgets serve much of a purpose in the game. Although the game looks bad and even sounds bad somehow, because during the development, when they were downsizing the sound files, they were crunched way too much to fit on the card. So it just sounds fucking bad. Play it if you hate yourself.
Archie! Archie! Hurry! Save us, Archie!
One of the best games on the N64 was Star Fox, a rail shooter of all things. But for whatever reason, that didn't prompt a ton of developers to jump on the hype train and make their own rail shooters. Like how developers had made a number of survival horror games following the release of Resident Evil 1, and a number of first-person shooters following the release of Half-Life 1. But we did get a few, and a really awesome one is Sin and Punishment, released on the 21st of November 2000. Gameplay is what you would expect. If you've played a game like Panzer Dragoon, you know exactly what you're in for. You shoot your way through a level while perpetually moving forward, and then you make it to the end and get scored depending on how good you did. The story is that in the near future of 2007, Earth has been suffering from a global famine, and the Japanese government has fixed the problem by genetically engineering livestock that yield a lot more meat and don't consume a lot of food. Unfortunately, the creatures mutate and become a plague, and a people's army is formed and they felt threat. But they also start to impress the local population, leveraging their important role in monster fighting. You play as a gang of characters that are part of the rebel faction, and you shoot your way through both the monsters and the people's army for reasons that will become clearer later on. The story goes places, but I can't really get into it because the game is very short and most of the plot development is a big spoiler that you should experience on your own. Play it if you love rail shooters. And I don't think I could cap off a long video about Nintendo 64 and spooky themes without giving the Nintendo 64 Zelda games a bit of a spotlight. Because they are certified childhood nightmare fuel, and definitely have dark and disturbing themes. Ocarina of Time opens up as you, the hero of the story, Link, is awoken by a fairy that will be your companion for the entirety of the game. He has come to you now because the guardian spirit of the forest that you live in, the Great Deku Tree, needs your help. Approaching the mighty tree, he tells you that you are in fact not one of the Kokiri, the childlike beings that inhabit this forest. You are a Hylian, a human-like creature from the mortal realm, and the reason that a fair number of the Kokiri hate you is not because you are a dunce without a fairy, but because they are tiny racists. The reason that you've been called here is that the Great Deku Tree is sick, cursed by an evil man from the desert, and you enter his mouth and fight through his many chambers and battle the literal cancer spider that rests within his bowels. And while you save his spirit, his physical body withers and dies, leaving the Kokiri unprotected. And that is just the opening hour of the game. From here on out, it is an incremental progression into straight up horror territory. You will slay a dragon that has been eating the local stone folk population of a mountain, and then journey inside another living god, the fish guardian of the Sora people, Lord Jabu Jabu, and save the Sora princess inside him, and like in the Deku Tree, slay a literal cancer monster to free him from his torment. And there is just something about running around inside this fish, fighting all of the monsters inside him that are ailing and hurting him. It's horrifying traveling around this living, breathing being, manipulating his organs to progress and killing infections inside him, and even just swinging your sword and accidentally hitting the walls of his inside makes him winch in pain, and it makes the whole level shake, and that is just grotesque. And from there, it just gets more and more and more dark. See, Link, having assembled the 3 magical artifacts from each of the 3 immortal tribes of Hyrule, opens the door to the Temple of Time. Because Link, being just a kid, cannot defeat the great evil Ganon on his own. He has to lose. He has to pull the Master Sword before he is ready. This will send him 7 years into the future and age his body in the process, making it strong enough physically to battle Ganon's actual lieutenant. Because up until now, the 3 beasts that we've slayed, they have just been beings that Ganon has corrupted or created with a snap of his fingers. Nothing more. And Ganon knew that Link would do this. And in the years when Link was sleeping, he laid waste to the capital of Hyrule, leaving only the reanimated corpses of the people that didn't survive the evacuation to now roam the streets. The same streets that when Link was a kid were full of life and mystery, games and joy. The Kokiri, without their guardian, were invaded and enslaved by Ganon's Moblin army. The Gorons are captured and taken to Death Mountain to be executed one by one, so that the Destroyer of Worlds, Volvagia, can increase its strength. And the Sora's domain has frozen over, and they now eke out a meager existence in their nuclear wasteland-like home, severed off from their connection to Lake Hylia and the Water Temple, and the source of life in the Kingdom of Hyrule. And the Gerudo, the desert people of which Ganon is one, now finds themselves forced to assist him in all of his crimes because of ancient, outdated laws. And the sequel is just as metal. During Ocarina of Time, Link killed all of Ganon's lieutenants and then assaulted his fortress of Horror, and then brought the fight directly to him and killed him not once but twice, but also trapped his spirit within a prison in an ethereal realm beyond the living world. But Link knew that this wasn't enough. Ganon's spirit would, through some method or another, always get loose again, and he might not be around to stop him the next time. And all of the people that Ganon has killed, their deaths would be for nothing if he came back. So Link travels back in time before any of this happened, and as a child he delivers a letter to the king detailing all of the crimes that Ganon has committed up until now, and also his plan to overthrow the king of Hyrule. And because of the revelation, Ganon was apprehended and executed for his crimes, stopping the events of the game from ever happening in the first place. Link had won, but at what cost? He had saved both his current future, the would-be dark future, and he had even saved the sacred dimension itself. And yet, none of it had ever happened. He was the only one who really knew, and worst of all, Navi, the fairy that had come to him, sent by the Great Deco Tree, his only friend and constant companion, and only person that knows any of this shit has happened. Her mission was over, and fairies cannot be bonded to Hylians forever like they can with the Kokiri. They can accompany them and aid them in their quest, but once the quest is over, so is their bond, and Navi had to leave. And Link, having no other purpose in this world, left to go find her, and he traveled through the Lost Woods and wound up in another world, the world of Termina, a mirror dimension of Hyrule where many things are the same and many faces are familiar, but where everything is a little different. And what a time to arrive. The Skull Kid, a member of the Lost Boys, Kokiris that lose their fairies and get lost in the Lost Woods and end up being corrupted, he found a mask, Majora's Mask, and the mask gave him immense power and also something else. It gave him a friend because the mask is sentient, but what a bad friend to have. The mask then started corrupting him, and soon his formerly childish pranks went way beyond mischief. As Link arrives in Termina, the Skull Kid is fooled into pulling the master of all pranks, and he sets the moon of Termina on a collision course with the land. And as the game opens up, Link has 3 days to stop the moon from falling down and killing everyone. But here is the kicker. Link, he cannot stop it in 3 days. He has to travel back and forth in time during those 3 days and manipulate not just time but also people to set things right. With the aid of the dead spirits of Termina's 3 would-be heroes, he has to embark on a quest to awaken Termina's 4 elemental guardians so that they can hold off the falling moon long enough so that he can enter the falling moon and fight Majora and the possessed Skull Kid and free one from the other and sever their connection so that their power depletes and so that the moon can be set back into its place in the skies above. The Zelda 64 games are fucking hardcore and I love it. And I think a lot of people who wouldn't otherwise be into horror had a little seed planted within them when they played these games as a child, because they are a gateway drug for the spookies. And in a way, they are kind of classic survival horror games. Somewhat interconnected worlds, limited inventory, the option of running from encounters, hard bosses, threat, you name it. They deal with stuff. When Ganon lays waste to Hyrule Castletown, the refugees seek shelter in a nearby town of Kakariko, and you can talk to them and they are not doing great. And likewise, in Clocktown in Termina, the setting of Majora's Mask, the townsfolk will during the course of the game's 3 days learn of the moon falling and they will try to deny it, and others will just accept it. And the closer the moon comes, the more they all start to panic, and there's something gut-wrenching about their dread being irrelevant, because Link will periodically over the course of the game travel back in time, and they will go through the same emotions over and over and over again. And there's something scary about seeing characters in media being devoid of agency, not because they are poorly written, but because it's taken from them. And that is one of the things that both of these games do very well. You are the chosen one, and you will win. But being the chosen one, unlike a lot of other stories, it is a burden, it is a cross to bear. It feels monumental, which is probably why these games stick with people that play them as kids.
Play them if you like video games. And that was a complete overview of every dark and disturbing game on the Nintendo 64. Except a bunch of fighting games, because those are always dark, and I maybe want to do like a separate video about like dark fantasy fighting games at some point. Not a lot of these fit yours, mine, or really anyone's definition of what a horror game is, but they all deal with themes that we see present in horror, and horror doesn't really need to be conventionally framed to be scary or a horror, really. I hope you saw a few things in here that you liked. Maybe you saw a few things here that you've already played. And if you have played some of these or you want to play some of these, please tell me down below. Because I want to know which ones you want to check out, and I really want to know what you think about the ones that you have checked out. Until I see you again, stay safe and take care.
Pressure on
Was this whole entire thing just a thinly veiled attempt to talk about some games that I didn't know how else to talk about? Your ass it fucking was.
Roligt.